Welcome, one and all, to another episode of Pacific414 episode review. I am your host, Mike, as always, and this afternoon I'm going to be reviewing episode 8 of WandaVision, previously on. And basically, what this episode encompassed was, this is your life type of episode. And what I mean by that is after starting an interrogation inside the dungeon, and that dungeon being underneath the house in the basement of Agnes's house, and Wanda being interrogated, as we saw in the conclusion to last week's episode. Well, you know, Agnes, or Agatha Harkness, wants to know a few answers to a few of her questions. And her main question that she wants an answer to is, how in the world did Wanda create all this so convincingly, and to have her powers expand so far and over such a vast area? Well, we do end up learning how that happened, but in order to do that, Agatha, or Agnes, whatever you want to call her, but Agatha Harkness uses a strand of hair. But even before we get to that, and the opening to this episode, the little teaser to this episode, if you will, we see that it takes place in Salem, Massachusetts during the Salem witch trials. And we see Agatha tied to a post, and she's surrounded by witches, and one of them being the Mother Witch. And what ends up happening is they try to execute Agatha for using powers that she doesn't fully understand and going against their code, and they try to use their combined powers and combined strength to stop her, only to have it fail and all the witches end up dying. And that brings us to present day, where, as I said before, we have Agatha and Wanda inside the dungeon underneath Agatha's house. Agatha uses a strand of hair from Wanda to open a doorway into the past. So, the first doorway we enter is back in Sokovia, and it's at the residence of the Maximoffs with Wanda's mother and father and Pietro. And Wanda's father comes in, and he has a suitcase. And inside this suitcase are DVDs of various sitcoms from the 60s and 70s. You see that there's Bewitched, there's I Love Lucy, there's the Dick Van Dyke Show hidden behind a picture inside a wall. So, we pretty much already knew that's how she came up with this world, but we get confirmation there that that is how she came up with this world that she's put herself in, and, put other people in against their will, which is confirmed in this episode. But I will get to that. And if you've never watched my episode reviews before, the way I do it is my own way. I'll skip points, I'll go over points, I'll go back to points. But what ends up happening is we, see that the Maximoff family is getting ready to sit down and watch an episode of the Dick Van Dyke Show during war torn Sokovia, which, reminded me, especially growing up in the 90s, when you heard about Yugoslavia and Bosnia and the Kurdish attacks that were happening there at the time. It's kind of parallel to that in certain aspects. But, you know, we see the family sitting down to watch the Dick Van Dyke Show, and it's great to see clips from a classic episode, a classic sitcom, you know actually being played. You know, first it's referenced in episode one, and it's been referenced in this series so far, and then you actually see it. So that was nice. And all right, I've got a little soft spot for classic sitcoms. But anyways, you know, we see that the family's enjoying the time they're spending together, because even young Pietro says, after his father's speaking Sokovian, he says to his father, "I thought we said that on, sitcom day, which was a Tuesday, we would all practice our English." And, Pietro's father apologizes. And what ends up happening is there's a close up shot of young Wanda, which is actually adult Wanda, but she walked through the doorway and Agnes told her that you're on. And as she stepped forward, she went from adult back to the age she was at the time that Tony Stark's weapon attacked their apartment and ended up killing her parents and destroying the apartment that she and Pietro were growing up with. So then what ends up happening is, Agnes, you know, comes up to Wanda and says, "How many days were you hiding underneath the rubble trying to avoid this bomb?" And Wanda says 2 days. And then the next thing we see is there is a door with a security lock on it, and it requires a security code, but with Agnes being a witch and Wanda being hesitant to walk through this door, Agnes tells Wanda to walk through this door. Why? Because if you recall, at the end of Captain America Winter Soldier, when we first saw the end credit scene with Pietro and Wanda as the little teaser for what's coming, well, that's why. Because then, it ties into Avengers Age of Ultron and the aftermath of Age of Ultron, because Wanda says that she doesn't want to be back in that chamber that she and Pietro were in that was run by Hydra. And we end up getting, post Age of Ultron, where it's Wanda and Vision at the Avengers complex. But before I go a little too far, I do want to say we do learn how Wanda got her powers. And she got her powers from the Mind Stone inside Loki's scepter. So, you know, again, just like Captain Marvel got her powers from the Mind Stone when it was still the Tesseract, that's how Wanda gets her powers. So, we learn that, Wanda and Vision are having a quiet moment together inside the Avengers complex because Wanda's grieving over the loss that she suffered in Sokovia with Quicksilver, aka Pietro, being shot and killed while rescuing the kids to get them evacuated. And, they have a connection there. Of course, we all know that Wanda and Vision have a connection, but it, leads us into the beginning of Vision learning about humanity. Kind of like Data, kind of like Data, but not exactly like Data. But then what ends up happening is, there's a conversation between Agatha and Wanda, and it's revealed that Wanda couldn't cope with the fact that she not only lost Pietro, but she also lost Vision. And after losing Vision and, of course, her parents, she was in a dark place and there was no one to pull her out. So, next thing we see is Wanda's, you know, at the Avengers, not the Avengers complex, Swords complex. Sorry about that. But she's at Swords complex, you got Director Hayward there, and of course, Wanda's specifically at the Sword complex to recover Vision's body because she doesn't want Vision's body to be used as a weapon. She wants to give him a proper funeral service, a proper burial, and she's there at the Sword facility, and she is granted permission to see Hayward. And as Hayward and she are talking, Hayward motions her to a laboratory where they're disassembling Vision and analyzing each and every part of what makes Vision work because they're trying to bring him back online. They are essentially trying to use him as a weapon, but they have no power source. And without the power source, they can't bring Vision back online. So, what ends up happening is Wanda's watching as they're dissecting Vision, tearing him apart, and she says, "Stop it, stop it, stop it." She presses her hands upon the glass, breaking the glass, floats on down. Some guards come up, they point their guns at her. Hayward calls them off and lets Wanda have her moment. And she goes up to Vision's head, and you see the hole where the Soul Stone used to be. And, it's no longer there because, as you all know, Avengers Infinity War, Thanos came and took the Soul Stone. And what ends up happening is Wanda hovers her hand above Vision's forehead. She can't sense anything from him, so she ends up leaving. And she ends up getting on the highway and winds up in the town of Westview. And she starts looking around. We see some familiar faces that we've already seen, but as their actual personalities, she pulls up to a lot where there's really only the foundation of a house that was to be constructed. And the whole reason why is because when Wanda came out of the Sword facility and got into the car, on the passenger seat, there was a piece of paper with some plans for a house. And there's a heart on this piece of paper, and it says to grow old together. V. So it was a note from Vision. So Wanda gets out of the car after pulling up into the driveway, and she starts walking onto the lot where this foundation is with the note in hand. She ends up getting on her knees, dropping the note, and bursting into tears. And then there's a red burst of her powers, which starts forming the house and anything nearby. And then there's an even larger burst, explosion, if you will, of her powers, which traps everybody in Westview in Wanda's own little world. And next we see, after everything's constructed, we see Vision being reformed. And we also see Wanda looking very 1950s sitcom, with the hairstyle and the costume, or the dress in this case. So, what ends up happening after that is, it's cut away after Vision and Wanda are kissing. We hear clapping in the distance of the studio because we see studio lights. And the person clapping, of course, is Agatha Harkness. And she says well done because Wanda's just revealed how she created the illusion of Westview for all the world to see, at least the barrier. And for those that are inside the barrier, they're trapped. They don't know what's going on. So then what ends up happening is Agnes disappears. And then, this is the second time in the episode. I didn't mention the first time, but this is the second time in the episode where we hear the voices of Tommy and Billy. Wanda runs out in the middle of the neighborhood street. There's Agnes floating there in midair and holding the twins in place and pulling them back with her powers. And, Tommy and Billy are calling out to Wanda because they want her help. They want to be rescued. And what Agnes ends up saying to Wanda is that you're a different kind of witch. You're a dangerous witch that we never thought could actually exist. You're the Scarlet Witch, which all of us know who read some of the comics. Now, I will admit I haven't read all the comics pertaining to Wanda and Vision. But we all know that Wanda has always been known as the Scarlet Witch, and there's also something else. And again, it's a spoiler. That's why I'm calling this a spoiler review, just like I called last week's a spoiler review. And I am going to end this by revealing the end credit scene. The end credit scene is Vision himself. But which version of Vision are we getting? Is it going to be the one from the comic books that was brought back to life but had no true feelings for Wanda? Or is it the Vision we all know? My bet is on the former. But overall, you know, I like this episode. I like the beginning of the episode where we saw Agatha on trial and the other witches were trying to basically dispose of her because she was too powerful, too dangerous for the power that she was wielding. I like the fact that we got to see how every little, you know, every little incident in her life, every, you know, earth-shattering moment in Wanda's life is what basically helped form the Westview phenomenon. And really, I really liked seeing that, and like learning that, it was the Mind Stone that enabled Wanda to have her powers, and of course, the Mind Stone has also been used to control